The wind howled through the valley like a hungry wolf, tearing at trees and rattling windows. Snow fell so heavily it blurred the world into white, swallowing up the roads, the fences, even the familiar shapes of houses. Most people had long since locked their doors, drawn their curtains, and huddled inside with the heat turned up and the lights kept low. But on the edge of town, in a weathered farmhouse with a sagging porch, a frail figure stood looking out into the storm. Her name was Margaret. 78 years old, small as a sparrow, with silver hair pulled back in a bun. She had lived in that house alone since her husband passed away nearly a decade earlier. Despite her age, her back was still straight, and her heart still full of something rare, compassion. That night, as the storm raged louder, Margaret heard something unusual, a low rumbling that didn't belong to the wind. At first she thought it was thunder. But then the sound grew, distinct and mechanical, until she realized what it was: motorcycles. 15 of them. The storm made them sound like beasts snarling through the snow, and when the headlights broke through the whiteness, Margaret's heart skipped. A group of rough-looking men, leather-clad and tattooed, slowly pulled up in front of her little farmhouse. Their jackets bore the unmistakable patch, Hell's Angels. To any passerby, they would have looked menacing outlaws of the open road, notorious for their reputation. And here they were, stranded, their bikes hissing steam as snow melted off the engines. For a moment, Margaret froze. Fear prickled in her chest. She was alone, vulnerable, and the storm had cut off the phones. She could have turned off her light, pretended she wasn't home. She could have shut the door and prayed they went away. But she didn't. Margaret pulled her shawl tighter and stepped out onto the porch, snow stinging her cheeks. "You boys look frozen half to death," she called over the wind. "You'd better come inside before you turn into icicles." The bikers glanced at one another, surprised. They weren't used to being invited in, especially by someone like her. Their leader, a tall man with a graying beard and tired eyes, shook his head. "Ma'am, we don't want to cause any trouble. Just looking for a place out of the storm. We'll sleep in the barn if it's all right." Margaret studied them, faces hard from the road, eyes softened by exhaustion. And she thought of her husband, who had ridden a bike in his youth, back before life slowed him down. She thought of how cold the barn would be. She thought of how nobody, no matter their past, deserved to freeze to death in a snowstorm. "You'll sleep in this house," she said firmly. "Now, get inside before I change my mind." One by one, the bikers stepped through her door, shaking snow from their boots, their huge frames awkward against her lace curtains and floral wallpaper. They looked out of place, giants in a dollhouse. But Margaret bustled about as though they were nothing more than guests at Sunday supper. She set out blankets, dug through her pantry for canned soup, and stoked the fire until the old hearth glowed. The bikers were quiet at first, unsure of how to act in the presence of such unexpected kindness. But slowly, the warmth softened them. They ate, they thawed, and eventually, they spoke. Stories tumbled out, tales of the road, of hard lives, of mistakes made and regrets carried. Margaret listened without judgment, her eyes kind, her hands steady as she poured tea. One of the younger men, with tattoos crawling up his neck, broke down in tears. He told her about his mother who had disowned him, about the child he hadn't seen in years. Margaret reached across the table, her thin hand covering his. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she whispered. "Even you." That night, 15 hardened bikers slept under Margaret's roof. She tucked extra quilts over them, humming softly as though they were her own sons. The storm raged outside, but inside, there was peace. Morning came bright and clear, the storm broken. The bikers stood outside, engines rumbling again, leather shining in the sun. They thanked Margaret awkwardly, some with tears in their eyes, others with promises they weren't sure how to keep. Their leader pressed a wad of cash into her hands, but she shook her head. "I don't want your money," she said. "Just promise me you'll do something good for someone else. That's all I ask." The men rode away, engines fading into the distance. Margaret watched them go, then turned back inside, her little farmhouse quiet once more. She thought that was the end of it. But it wasn't. The next day, as Margaret was tending to her chickens, she heard a sound unlike anything she had ever heard before.
Not one motorcycle, not 15, but dozens.
The ground shook beneath her feet. She hurried to the porch, shading her eyes against the sun. And there they were. 100 motorcycles, lined up along the road in front of her house, chrome glinting, engines thundering. The men she had sheltered had returned, this time with their brothers. They dismounted, one by one, a sea of leather jackets and patched vests. Margaret's heart pounded, not with fear, but with wonder. Their leader stepped forward, holding out a helmet in his hand. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion.
"Yesterday you showed us kindness when you had no reason to. You reminded us that we're not just what the world thinks we are.
So today, we came back to show you, you're not alone either." The bikers had brought supplies. Truckloads of firewood, groceries, tools to fix her porch, even a brand new heater. Some began repairing her roof, others cleared the snow from her drive, while a few set to work chopping wood. They moved with the precision of an army, but this time their mission was love. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. For so long, she had lived quietly, believing the world had forgotten her. And now, here were 100 men, rough around the edges, but standing as proof that compassion could spark miracles. Over the following weeks, the bikers visited often. They painted her house, repaired her fences, brought her flowers, and filled her cupboards. Word spread through the town, and neighbors who once whispered about the Hells Angels began to see them differently. And it all began because a kind old lady had opened her door in a snowstorm.
The lesson. Kindness costs nothing, but its ripple effect is infinite. Margaret didn't see criminals or outlaws, she saw human beings.
And in that moment of shelter, she reminded them of their own humanity. Her choice changed not only their lives but the life of an entire community. So, my friends, remember this: the smallest act of compassion can open the biggest doors.